Not here to take away people's thoughts, but when we talk about religion, we're talking about it in the sense that we're just scared because something might happen because we can stop murder before it happens, not just arrest people after the murder's already taken place and the immorality has already been dealt.
I'm not entirely sure what religion has to do with that.
Islam, in this case. I mean,
Oh, well, sure.
yeah, I was giving the analogy for Israel.
Uh, well, I think there's much better ways to accomplish this, such as actually stabilizing the region. I think there should be an international effort towards introducing various facilities and governments and uh, actually modernized principles and philosophy, particularly Western, to the Middle East. And that's the only way that I think it should be undergone by an international effort. Because any one country, as we've seen with America's particularly, is they are often seen as just fertile grounds for waging war games and extracting resources. So overall, I don't disagree that there should be change. I don't think fascism is the way, and I don't think any one or a small group of countries moving in that region is the way. But I do think there should be an international effort, especially what with, uh, in large part, America's undoing of the stability of the region. Even though I wouldn't say it was um, the most likable stability, it still was stable and could have easily, over a good length of time, been moved into a less radicalized uh, state for its population.
Well, I guess I'll just give you kind of two examples, and these were examples I thought of in my head when I was really young. The only difference is that the first one I'm giving, I now believe the opposite. So the first example is that you come across a town of people, well, basically stabbing themselves and injecting pain upon themselves, inflicting that pain and not enjoying that pain. It's not some masochism thing. It's more to do with the fact that they're just doing it, but they decide to do it because apparently, if we are to believe in the concept of free will, they have free will to do it, and so forth. It's their freedom and liberty to inflict pain upon themselves, despite the fact that they're not progressing or building a civilization. They're killing themselves slowly, slowly. But if I had the power to just snap my fingers and then suddenly they stop doing that and they go back to work and they start, living happily and they are happy and they are joyful living their everyday lives, I'm taking away their freedom to, how do we say, to help them in this weird sense. I'm taking away their choice. And when I was younger, I used to say, it doesn't matter. Freedom is more important, but is it really? Is it really when people aren't even using their freedom correctly, where at this point they're basically just knifing themselves and hammering themselves and just, killing themselves? Is it necessary? Because they may be in control, but are they really in control?
Yes, they would be in control there. However, that doesn't mean they'll necessarily do something productive. Now, what I would say in an instance, say, uh, well, we can look at a society that actually did do something similar to this, feudal Japan. It worked out in the long run after eras of conflict and infighting and essentially decimating themselves for a long period. However, in the end, it worked out for them. But uh, say they continued into the modern day and simply stayed in their feudal state and never really progressed too very far. I would say that we should, as an international community, move towards implementing a more modernistic approach in their culture and their nation. What I would say is we should implant these actual productive, progressive, and I don't mean progressive in the sense of liberal. I mean as in actually moving forward with their civilization, um, goals and philosophies and means to achieve this. And if the people simply happen to not take to it, then there needs to be another approach to it. There needs to be another means of implementing these ideals. That's what I think should definitely happen in the Middle East right now. You know, as they happen to be uh, battling the more extreme varieties, such as Hamas and ISIS and other terroristic groups, and uh, oftentimes just themselves.
No, I understand. I do understand this. But when we talk about people having freedom, I mean, for instance, I'm in favor of legalizing marijuana, right? That's something that
Right.
only does, well, it can mess up some people's lives, but they're in control for some reason. But people killing themselves or making bad decisions on a whim because they're not feeling themselves, are they really in control then? Because they're not thinking it right. It's the same with children deciding to drink alcohol or have sex or transition or and that stuff that shouldn't be happening. It's like that because they're not really in control. They just have this perception that they are. We might say things when they're extremely negative. We might. And the thing is that we sometimes regret this. We almost always regret this actually. Is giving people, say, a parental figure, a form of authority, like, for instance, parents to the children and the government to its citizens, really that bad of an idea?
I would say that they are, in fact, in control. That doesn't mean they won't regret their actions later or even immediately. This is the same sort of quandary you might find with some of the older concepts of like a deal with the devil. You know, you can make a choice that seems oh so good in the moment, and then after a short while, or even far in the distant future, you might regret it. Just because somebody has the freedom to do an action doesn't mean they are free from the consequences, is what I'm getting at. I think they are most certainly at will, even if they aren't thinking very uh, carefully through it to make their own decisions in a society which permits it.
A society like ours, for instance, the West, does permit a lot of freedom, but when they say they're built upon freedom, it's really just in comparison to other countries, and people really realize this, and so they lose their patriotism and their appreciation for a country or a continent. And so the authority, people keeping them safe, they're looking out for their best interests. All the time, people just see the government as evil and corrupt, but they're looking out for their best interests, the people themselves. Now, the people may not agree with it, but it's from a good intention. Now, there are some evil, ness within companies and industries, but the government directly to the people, looking down upon them, viewing them, they're making and casting laws, establishing restrictions so that people don't just commit mass suicides. People don't just leave their countries. And North Korea does this in the sense that it's meant to have more citizens. It's meant to have more laborers, more workers, more everything. If citizens just leave their country, well, it's pretty much over. Now, obviously, I'm not going to agree with North Korea on this because North Korea has to have something good to begin with. It has to be a good society people want to be in. But in a good society, law like that, or keeping people together, or keeping people sane, the restrictions to help people live their life, that authoritarianism, fascism, it's meant to enhance people's lives. They don't want it to be enhanced. Some of them want to live miserably. but are they really in control of what they want until they know that they can have better? You don't know that your life is going to be better. If they saw the future for a fact that, well, if I just didn't do this and that, I would be better off, they most likely choose it.
Uh, on a good deal of points there, I would very much disagree. From the start, with your point that a great deal of politicians the world over uh, are inherently, for the most part, uh, making their decisions based upon the benefit of the people in general over themselves or any other party which happens to prop them up. Uh, I think is very much evidently incorrect. Uh, and as for your point on fascism, uh, the thing here is that I agree. There must be control. There must be a certain degree of control there, and rule and law and instruction. However, it should be limited only to the degree in which it protects the liberties and rights of others. If people wish to stage a mass suicide, and it is all of their free consent, I see no issue with that. If people wish to leave the country for justifiable reasons, I see no issue with that. If people want to live in a particular lesser state for some apparent reason, then I believe that's their freedom of choice. They don't impact the liberty of others who wish to be outside of that. And even if you say had um, a million, 2 million, let's bump it up to 5 million people who wish to live in these abject states of misery and despair and unproductivity. That's still only a minor population of, or a percentile of population of, say, a nation like the United States of America. Say you bump it up to, how many people do we have on the Earth right now?
7.4 million. Oh, billion, sorry.
Is it that small? I was about to say. All right. Well, if you say 2 billion people wish to live in this state, let's go to that extreme. The world over. Hell, even 2.5 billion. That's still an extremely small percent.
No, that's basically that's over 1/3, mate. That's over 1/3. If over 1/3 of all people live,
Hold on though. That's the world over, spread over every single country, every single landmass we inhabit. That's still a relatively small percentile. You will still have the overwhelming majority working towards something productive. So I would certainly say that it is the duty and the onus of the majority who wish to work towards something good and fair and productive and positive to work against and allow themselves to weed out against the opposition who would wish these objective, lesser, insufficient peoples. Now, I wouldn't say that there is that many people who wish to work towards this, so that's even better. So you have a great, overwhelming majority of the world who wishes to find some state which they find desirable. Now, they may not be correct. Of course, a lot of people have differing viewpoints, and a lot of people will find different conclusions on what is the best, how to go about it, the end goal of these motions, etc., etc. But I think it is definitely necessary to allow the liberties of everyone, even despite the fact that it will grant inferior ideas and ideals and actions to occur in relation to the overall production of the world in order to ensure the individuality and individual liberties and rights of those who inhabit this earth.
Okay.
And eventually, even if it takes a great deal of time, even though there will undoubtedly be setbacks, even though there will be tremendous tragedies, uh, they will win in the end.
Oh, okay. Well, say that people deciding to live on their own, to be homeless, as we've talked about some time ago, to be by themselves, is not hurting anybody else. Maybe not in a way that you will see it directly, but in a way that it hurts the economy. If less people work within a country, that overall stock market for the country, that overall earnings and growth in civilization will plummet. If, say, 2.5 billion people left, right, the world, just left them working all together, right? Talking about the working class here, then interest rates, basically anything related to money, that would just plummet down because we wouldn't be able to keep building things, creating new things, civilization. And for the people living in the working class, the people working constantly and having homes and being adults and just in everyday society, right? Whatever civilization may be, they're going to suffer in the sense that they're not going to be able to strive for progress as fast. The world will take way longer to get to the point of which, well, it gets great. And so many more people will be in the dock for that time. They won't have the things they want. They won't have the economy they want. And they won't have the workers they want, alongside industry suffering because, well, they'll be losing business. There's 2.5 billion less than there was before. And so the entire economy, if that happened, it's just going to plummet down. It's just going to go downwards on a spiral scale to the point where, well, you can't rely on big businesses anymore because they're just hit an all-time low. The individual citizens of a country, well, they're losing 2.5 billion citizens or even small amounts. So they're going to be losing basically workers in every single category. And so less things are going to be done. This is why homelessness is a cancer to society in the sense that there's less people working, in the sense that we're meant to be encouraging and rewarding people to get rich, to have people know them, to contribute to whatever is around them. And this is hurting everybody in the sense that it's even hurting the people who decide to resign because, well, they're not going to be protected, are they? They're all by themselves. They're just living by themselves. They have one another, but one another is pointless since they're all pretty stupid enough to even leave something that is keeping them safe. And so they might tumble down a dark alley in the sense that, well, it's not going to be a good life for them. It's not going to be a good enough life for the people living back home who are indeed the working class. And this is why anarchism cannot exist. This is why, this isn't libertarianism. This is anarchism because it is hurting people. Libertarianism is based upon the fact that it's not directly affecting other people's lives, but it is in the sense that industries, stock markets, they are going to go down. And say people who are scientists, well, 2.5 billion of them left, not 2.5 billion scientists, but a fair amount of the scientists left, the projects they're working on, the people they had left behind, all those things, all the progress, it's just going to be stumbled. It's going to be stumped for a long time due to that. And so if we had everybody working, the world would be, well, the world would be way more advanced by now, completely.
I think your points there are very much set upon quite a list of presumptuous statuses. Uh, to begin with, I don't think at any point in time there will be a mass exodus of people towards homelessness. Pretty universally in all cultures, being homeless is considered something that is well beyond the the wishes of essentially everyone involved in a society. Homelessness is seen as, if not one of the foremost failures of your life,
You say
but
that,
also
though, but from what I've seen, from what society has recently become of it, when people look at homeless people, they feel sorry for this person. Say, oh, he must be being kicked out of his house. Oh, he must be being through so much. They feel this kind of stigma in the sense that, well, we're not trying to put them down and tell them to get jobs to, encourage them to work. They're just trying to say, society's being so rough on them, life is being so rough, and this kind of sympathy to some homeless people, sure, but to the majority of them, this is what people have in their mindsets. It's stupid. It's stupid because it's kind of encouraging and normalizing this, and in tens of years, it could get worse. You don't know. There could be mass homeless incidences.
well, as I was about to follow up with, there's also, if they're not seen as as objective failures in their life, they're often seen with a gratuitous amount of pity. I don't think there's any sort of societal shift that will move people towards, hey, homelessness is a fantastic idea. I don't foresee that happening. And even if there were, it certainly wouldn't be a mass exodus. This would be an extremely slow change over decades and decades, to the point where we have 2.5 billion homeless people.
Yes, but we
I don't
still
think that'll
eventually
ever
have that
happen.
number. We still get that number. Why does the time of how long it takes change the fact that we're going to end up with that number?
It changes things tremendously. Uh, it, sorry, um, it will absolutely not plummet the stock markets. It will absolutely not create some sort of massive brain drain in our scientific community. It will absolutely not um, destroy the world in some dramatic uh, fashion. At worst, it'll allow these people to weed themselves out of society. Now, I say this because, as I said, this would take decades and decades to actually culminate. If we were to ever somehow achieve such a high level of homelessness, if for some reason there was such a cultural or economic shift that forced this condition to be present, um, all it would do is really push towards making the jobs of which could easily have been fulfilled by humans previously more automated, as we're seeing anyhow. Um,
Well, here's an example, right? Let's just say that there are these people who work in sweat factories. They work in sweatshops. They work all the time. They work 24/7. It's just painful for them, right? And they're constantly working. They're in China, by the way, and they're working on clothes for you. And guess what? Those clothes are the things that you order online, and those things get shipped to you. And so basically, every time somebody orders things online, and they're ordering them in the millions, all right? This is such a demanding service. We got millions of people slaving away in China, right? Making these individual, whatever it may be, clothes, any part of industry products, right? If those people just quit their jobs, would be a bit of an epidemic in Western countries. Oh no, these things aren't going to be delivered. These things aren't going to be made to begin with. Oh, now I'm going to pay way, way more in my own country because they're going to be manufactured here. If everybody just left the jobs, and another analogy would be that, all right, if people stopped creating different forms of technology, let's say in Japan, right, if they just stop making different forms of technology that we eventually decide to adapt into Western culture, oh, wait, we're not going to get our special whatever it may be. And because people start doing this stuff, other people won't be profiting off of their success. But don't worry, they'll profit off of their own success if they stay with their job.
and that's one of the reasons that this sort of scenario would never happen in the first place. There's far too many incentives to keep people from simply up and leaving their position in society. But to come to your analogy, or rather scenario, on Chinese sweatshop workers suddenly stopping. Now, that's actually potentially plausible. That's something that might happen. I think it's an extremely slim to none chance that it ever would. I first see them trying to leave the country rather than simply, oh, I'm homeless now. Uh, Not only just because China is extremely urbanized and it isn't exactly a very nice place for anybody who would wish to live nomadically and without a home or any means of income, uh, but also because I'm, if memory serves, any sort of highly dishonorable act, such as simply giving up on all of your progress, meager as it may be, towards an ideal living situation, is extremely, extremely dishonorable and disavowed and disliked. Um, there's a great deal of factors that are keeping people from doing this. Um, but even if that were to happen, there would be an increased incentive to create technologies that would make this process more efficient to an incredible degree. We more than have the technology to axe every single sweatshop, axe, well, pretty much any industrial factory based production line, um, in order to make them automated, which would cost a uh, quite a large front end investment. But beyond that would be dramatically, dramatically cheaper in the long run, which eventually will happen anyhow.
Um,
Um,
it's kind. I'm kind of hearing this
would
eventual though. I'm kind of hearing that because right of now, these processes are still happening.
That's because they're the cheaper, more efficient means immediately. If there were some sort of mass exodus, yes, there would be quite an incentive, and there would be quite a few people who would move towards filling um, this role. It's simply the most profitable, most effective solution if this event were to ever occur. So yes, eventually, I would say probably within 2 decades, if there were some sort of mass exodus, which there never will be, as far as I'm concerned, for the streets of your given civilization.
Okay. Well, this is the thing. If the workers in China got the choice, if they were given the vote in a fair social democracy, they would vote to be paid more and have better jobs available. But in a monarchy slash dictatorship, they don't have the vote. And so what they can do, the people running the monarchy, is they can enforce this law in which they get paid very little. And so because they get paid very little, they do more work because they have to make up the hours and they work and they work and they work.
Uh,
But I'm just gonna say it here, Ryan. Obviously, they're getting not paid enough. Obviously, not being paid enough, right? I would obviously pay them more. I obviously give them better health conditions, better houses. Actually, reward them, let them live happy lives. You know, China took it too far, but to the extent, right? In Bangladesh, for instance,
uh,
the idea to some
before
extent,
you go on,
some
I'd
extent.
like to say something
Oh, you go
quite
ahead.
to the
Yeah, go
opposite.
ahead.
Uh, if you were in some sort of dictatorial society, as China very much is authoritarian, um, and you attempted to enforce this law to drop their wages even further and enforce some sort of even lesser conditions, you might find people who would wish to work those long, long hours for their meager subsistence. But what you would really be doing is creating a a strong incentive for insurgency and resistance. That's what you would be doing. If we were to go for a very American example, let's look at the Revolutionary War with between the UK and America's colonies. They did something so minor as enforcing higher taxes. If you were to take away their means of survival, unless they were to essentially dedicate themselves as full time, non-stop slave labor, what you would be doing is you would be making the incentive for someone to depart from this system entirely and move into an underground resistance. Not only because that's the most effective uh, thing to do under such a given circumstance, but also because it would be sorry, it would be the moral imperative for them at the time.
I'm aware that if people grew up like this, they'd probably adjust to it. I'm not saying as bad as Bangladesh. I'm saying to some extent because people in the Western world and Europa are too privileged, while people in places like, well, say Africa and say the Middle East or in Bangladesh, right? They're too poor because of the terrible wages they've been given and the terrible opportunity or lack of it they've been given. And so the thing is, I just want there to be a balance. I want there to be, to some extent, a kind of a moderate compromise. Oh, so it's just an install update. Close off it. But yeah, I want there to be just some moderation, a compromise between the two. Because if you make people work a fair amount, keep the economy up, but also give them kind of an incentive to live alongside better work conditions, to some extent we can see progress. But in this country, in Australia, people just aren't working enough, and people in the economy is just not as big as it could be. Imagine how much capitalism could have ballooned and just grossed upwards if people worked more, if we were provided with better products. You kind of giving in because in a weird sense it's kind of selfless to work while it's selfish to hoard all your money and become homeless.
I see where you're coming from now. Over here, the U.S. is really quite an economic biggin, so I didn't entirely get that sort of perspective that you have. Uh, yes, there should be great incentives to work in any sort of civilization. Uh, However, at least over here, I think we have quite an imbalance already, mostly towards the working end. Uh, I think it's rather apparent that there are quite a few laws and prevailing cultures within the U.S. which push very much towards the benefit and favor of the employer, as as opposed to the employee. So, as for Australia, if people simply aren't working as much as they could, I think there should be an actual incentive behind that, beyond just their subsistence. I don't think subsistence should simply be the only incentive to work. If companies wish to make more production, then they'll simply have to provide more reason to go out and work, as opposed to the people simply enjoying their lives as a first world country who actually have the time to engage in cultural, artistic, or otherwise non work related activities. You have to make something that is more appealing than going out and doing those things while also working enough that you can survive and comfortably at that.
Well, it seems like you're looking at this from the people's angle. I'm looking at it from the government's angle because the government has been given a bad rap for a lot of bad reasons. A lot of good reasons too, but a lot of bad reasons. And the thing is, when it comes to citizens' work, a long time ago. Let's say the 1950s, right? Oh, the 1950s. People were more of a community. They had more friends back then. They were interacting with more people. They were more close to their family. Now, the uprise of technology could be affecting us in this sense. That's why we were more detached. We're spending less time with one another. But back then, people had a kind of incentive to work because they could talk about it. They had more passion to it. It was something that was discussed more in schools or upper education or with people who were getting people ready for that. But in our time, if you ask kids, hey, what are you going to do when you grow up? And I've asked many students this, they don't have they don't have a thing. They've got nothing to really say. But back a long time ago, that was how do we say a question commonly asked. What do you want to be when you grow up? And that's kind of like a famous quote within itself, just aimed at many
I think
people.
so. Yeah. Now, I think that really comes down to the fact that a majority of the world's professions today are extremely unfulfilling, are extremely, for the most part, barely able to sustain a person with their income, and are usually, in most companies, very adversarial towards the employee and very much toward or swayed in favor of the employer. Whenever you're faced with all of these factors, I think there's a lot that keeps both adults and children from going, "Hey, that looks like something that inspires me. That is my passion. I think I'll go towards that." Especially whenever those things are in an extreme minority of demand. You really don't find anything that gives you the artistic and personal involvement that a lot of old works that have now been passed off to uh, very soulless corporations or have died off entirely are today, or were back then, rather. You don't see masons, or you don't see weavers, or trinket makers, or miners, or inventors, or any of these things in the modern world because there's just not a massive demand. It's not as old fashioned as it was in a way, I think I would say. There's just not as much soul to working. And it's not really you don't really have the option of being outside of that as someone as say a pioneer who gets to experience the wonders and dangers and adventures of life. You don't have the option of uh, uh, becoming some sort of artisan or tradesman, or simply going out and seeing the wild, free plains of existence.
People can if they want, to some extent. I'm just saying that the idea of keeping people intact is something that a society is always looking to do. But the best method is really the question of well, how do we do this in a moral sense? How do we keep people's liberty? But in a society that is collective, not a collectivist society, but in a society that is collective in the sense that people have
A
common,
collection of
yeah,
individuals.
common interests, right? Most of the
Yeah.
time, they're not going to want to exercise these freedoms. They may have them, but it's really just an illusion because they're not going to exercise their freedoms to begin with. Now, I mean this in the way that a society isn't going to lie to its people, but it is going to, however, enforce specific laws that are going to help out everyone at the expense of people doing some stupid stuff. As we've already agreed, yeah, there's some basic laws, but when it comes to being homeless, for instance, if somebody has the opportunity to get a job, to get a house, to buy things, to work for somebody, and therefore contribute to an industry, a company, or any salesman, is the case and they've been given the opportunity, if they're not willing to take it, are they really a valued citizen? Or do they just happen to live within the country? Should they have their citizenship revoked because they're not really contributing anything? And shouldn't there be basic standards for living within a society that people need to legally and lawfully hold others up to?
Yes, I would say they very much are a valued citizen, even if they don't happen to immediately contribute to them. They are still a human being, and they still were granted citizenship of that country. Now, I would say that yes, there needs to be a great amount of incentive for people to go out and produce and contribute. However, at least I can say from an American perspective, over here in the United States, there are a great deal of things that would prevent somebody from rising up out of poverty. Uh, Me myself, without the assistance of my family and uh, uh, transport back and forth to my employment and um, some help whenever I've fallen on misfortune or harder times, would be impossible. Uh, at minimum, here in Kentucky, and for a low class, super basic, one bedroom, one living space slash uh, kitchen and one bathroom apartment, you're looking at least, I would say, 400 US dollars, plus whatever utilities they don't include in that to be covered for just one person. Now you can say that they're sure you can room up with people. However, then they have their own expenses, their own cost of food, gas, if they have their own transportation. If not, you have to. They either have to rely on whoever does in the household or some other outside transportation to get back to their or back and forth to the job. Here, probably your closest bit of work that's above minimum wage is um, at least a 5-10 miles outside of where you happen to live, even if you live in town. So there's not a lot of means of actually going out and producing and contributing for yourself. There are a lot of hang-ups that exist within the world of the working. Uh, and I know this is one who does happen to be a full-time minimum wage worker who, without, as I mentioned previously, the assistance of my immediate family, uh, would either have to rely on the goodwill of someone else to provide me transportation and um, a place to live, or would be homeless.
Well, the average person works. The average person isn't a homeless. If we want to get specific about how much people should work, that's really complicated. You have to understand a bit of economics. I'm not sure if I'm there yet because I don't hold a job. But I just feel like what we have now, right? I can obviously see people working more than the average adult would be because it's been going down gradually. If you look back at something like 1930, people were working way more. People were working more constantly and they had larger families. They were more married, men who got married more often. And back then there were less freedoms, there's less liberty back then because people were they were kind of giving up to the expectations, right? You'd have your grandparents telling you, live up to these expectations. You'd have the government telling you, well, you have to do this, you have to do that, and you just social stigma as well. But now, your grandparents will tell you, be whatever you want to be, or something like that, and your parents will say, be what you desire when you grow up, whatever that may be. It's kind of just silly because when you're really young, there's this impression, oh, your parents just want to see you do something you enjoy. Really, if we are to contribute to the economy and any industry, any growing profit, it's about what is really needed. In fact, I think the most selfless act, right, and most giving act is to work in a job that is underpopulated or a job that really needs to be done. Some people intentionally go out of their way to stop pollution. They don't get paid for that. Some people go out of the way to stop whale hunting because they're passionate about that. They have morals, right? Some people decide to work in the field of being a lumberjack, and that's a dangerous job, but they do it because it's underpopulated very much. And so there are morals and standards people hold themselves to when they do these specific things. That's happening less. And these fields of which are underpopulated are becoming more underpopulated as they weren't something like 40, 50 years ago.
Yes, I would say one's self-preservation does kick in their consideration for a choice of profession. Uh, on you mentioning the uh, rise of people who would say, be exactly whatever you want to be, I think that is very much tempered with the inclusion, even though it might not be directly spoken, it is heavily implied that you must choose a profession which actually can support you, in addition to, hey, choose something that's actually enjoyable for you. And I think that's a very laudable sort of philosophy, and that's in fact why I'm doing what I'm doing now. On speaking with you, and then I'll be editing and rendering and uploading this to YouTube. Uh, I think it's very necessary for people to do something they enjoy, and hopefully in time this will become a career of mine. Now, as for uh, the demand of fields which you were mentioning, not only is it something that could be morally within the realm of a person, I think it's also economically something which could very much benefit them. Of course, if you've got a low supply but high demand field, which is unending as far as its necessity, as far as we can foresee as a species, uh, you're going to get paid more in general. If you're going to be a nuclear physicist, there's not that many people to fill that role. However, there is an increasing supply, so you'll probably be paid more. Um,
And the reason physicism and physicists get paid so much, right? The reason physicism industries or any, scientific research centers get funded is because they are contributing directly. Now, the thing is that they're sometimes not funded by taxes, and so people who work give taxes because that's sometimes a legal requirement. A lot of the time it is. And in a lot of countries, that is the case. And so when people work, when they pay taxes, it goes around and it contributes to everyone. But people who are homeless aren't paying taxes. And so nobody's reaping the benefits of that, are they? Wouldn't that kind of
well,
collapse
no,
everything?
but they also aren't. They also aren't really getting any of the benefits of that
Yeah,
either.
no, that's why people should work,
You
though.
you. I agree, and I think that's something that should be very much promoted, and in fact is in most societies. However, they really aren't reaping any benefits either. They really aren't getting anything unless you would count, say, roads and hospitals, uh, streams, irrigation, uh, any of the bare essentials that are simply existent that aren't immediately administered on a short time scale and are very permanent. I suppose you could say they